So the three of you are co-founders of unicorn companies, and so basically 3 of the most valuable technology companies have been founded in the past 10 years. And I would argue that you are founders of the long-lasting unicorn companies, the real ones that are built to last. But I assume that it hasn't always been clear that that was going to be the case. Tell us some of the secrets of building a unicorn company. Like, what are non-obvious things that are maybe perhaps secrets about how you have built your companies?
Well, I think it's ever more present now and obvious than maybe when we first started the company that building a company around your customer and being maniacally focused about who your customer is and really seeking to be customer-centric versus just customer-friendly has been, I guess, one of our secrets. In the beginning, I was the customer support department for a good 2 years. I literally was answering customer support emails from the labor and delivery room. Having that connection and that authentic connection to our customers has been one of our secrets of gaining sustainability, because I think at the end of the day, it's not about your valuation or how much your shares are going to be worth, but it's about who your customers are and how they feel about you and how they feel when they're using your service or your product.
Yeah, I don't think any of us are going out trying to create a unicorn, so to speak. The most important thing is to find a real need that is underserved and go out there and do a better job than anyone else of delivering on it. And so when we started NextDoor, we tried to think about where is a pain point? What is something that people couldn't live without? And for us, that was really understanding that local community, your neighborhood was very important, and that there wasn't an easy way to be able to communicate with your neighbors. And so NextDoor filled that need. And so it's really about finding something that is underserved and delivering it and helping people with a real pain point.
So definitely agree that you need to solve a real problem, like a real problem that people have. You have to go after a big market. Like in my case, our market is anybody with a web property. I mean, when we started, people laughed at us saying, that's impossible, but we're doing it. And then it's making it really easy to use. So I think easy to adopt. And if you look at all the biggest companies that are the most successful, the ones that have grown the quickest in the last 5 years are ones who've made something super simple to try, and you just keep coming back and using it again and again and again. And so, again, in our case, we took something that took on average 2 to 6 weeks to sign up for, and we made it less than 5 minutes. I mean, that's how much simpler we made it to adopt our service.
Now, okay, you touched on people said it was impossible. I know that there are detractors for all your companies in the beginning. And some of the things you're saying, like go after a big market, solve a problem, like pretty much every startup says that.
Yes.
Right, so what is different about like both, and maybe how you've conceived of it, how you've executed it, that caused you to build companies that are worth over $1 billion when there's like, just like a giant graveyard of companies who have said that didn't make it?
I think the contrarian thing was to focus on something very small early on. So in our case, we're building private social networks for neighborhoods. We're trying to get a single neighborhood to adopt NextDoor. And then we were looking for the next 10, the next 100. When you think about it, there's something like 170,000 neighborhoods in the United States. You could be slowed down and daunted by that task if you think about trying to get all 170,000. In the beginning, we were just focused on the small thing, which is get the first one, get the first dozen, and figure out what the special sauce is before you start thinking about scaling and building a huge business.
And that, neighborhood by neighborhood is really hard, right? Like, especially if you don't want to have to go knock on doors. Like, can you tell us a little bit about the special sauce? Like, it's really hard to acquire people who live on a street.
So actually in the very beginning, not quite knocking on doors, but I was going into living rooms, going to homeowners associations, meeting with people and trying to really understand what people were missing with their connection to their local community. And for the first year, we did things almost entirely manually. That meant signing people up, doing the customer support, drawing the neighborhood boundaries by hand. And once we figured out what we needed to do, then we could build a product that could do that at scale. But you can't skip that first step of doing things in an unscalable way in the beginning if you're going to eventually figure out how to do it at scale.
Well, and Sarah brings up a good point, which is I think a commonality you can draw between the three of our companies is time. So when you look at that graveyard of companies that had these huge valuations, oftentimes they weren't working on building a real business for 10 years or 10 years plus, right? So I do think that element of time and working
And
on
patience.
exactly, and growing it iteratively is so important. And when I look at Eventbrite, that's what we've done. We haven't had this crazy hockey stick growth curve. We've had steady, solid growth year over year, and that comes back to not only patience, but also the people that you choose to be involved in the business. So how you choose your investors and what their view is on your business long term.
Did you communicate that to your investors and your team members or anyone, the stakeholders, basically like, oh, we're going to be doing this for the next 15, 20 years? Like, or did you get pushback like, hey, no, you need to figure out how to scale this. You're doing non-scalable things.
It was a conversation and a dialogue that brought us together with our investors. So when we first raised from Sequoia Capital in 2009 after bootstrapping the company for a number of years, and that was just a core part of the conversation. And then when we brought in Tiger Global and Lee Fixel, we really were all speaking the same language. I think that's what attracted us to the table, so to speak.
Yep.
I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
You have to line up your investors, your co-founders, your early employees to be in it for the long haul. And if you don't have that alignment, there's going to be conflict.
And that's, I mean, some of the audience here is like there are startup founders, there are people who are thinking about starting companies. There may be people who are trying to be entrepreneurs in larger companies. If you want to get Sling off the ground, is that a piece of advice you would have in terms of like how you set the expectations for doing non-scalable things that you can figure out how to scale later?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone has to be on the same page because it's easy to look back and be like, wow, that looked like it was a brilliant strategy. But in the moment, there are ups and there are downs, and you need to have people that are in it for the long haul and are just aligned with you on the strategy. For us, Bill Gurley, great investor from Benchmark who thinks about building things at huge scale, he was the first to say, don't be afraid to do unscalable things. And that was really important in the early days.
I think it depends a lot on what your business is. I mean, and so
I think
I'm
yours
very
kind of has
careful.
been this.
Yeah,
Hockey
careful who you
stick.
take advice from. I mean, we're just 3 data points, and there are 1,000 other data points out there where everyone has a different path to success. And we all have outside investors, so we've all raised money from the venture capital industry, which that caters really well to if you're going after a really big problem and you need a lot of capital to get there. And then you can go and say, tell this story of this is what we want to do to change the world. And you find the people who buy into that story who are like, I'm going to back you and your team to execute on that. That works less well if you're within a big company because they don't think like that. And maybe your business case or model or demo that you need set up is going to be very different than kind of the experiences we've had. So I think it really depends on what the business is. Do you need outside funding? Like, do you need venture capital? Or can it be funded by a strategic partner, customers, people who build products really quickly and then just start selling it? I mean, that's the best kind of business where you don't need to take outside capital. So it depends.
Okay. Do you have superpowers? And were you born with them or did you develop them?
I do have a superpower that I now know I was born with and I've passed on to at least one of my daughters, which is empathy, just deep, deep empathy. And I used to think that it made me weak because I sort of can walk into a room and feel the energy and be affected by it. And it's been far and away the greatest superpower in business because my ability to connect with someone and really get to the root of what motivates them helps me every single day in getting from point A to point B 2 times faster. Not because I always have an agenda, but just because I often find when you can understand where somebody's coming from, you really can get to the solution 2, 3, 10x faster.
Right. Yep.
So, a superpower. So it's funny. What comes to mind is that I was a lacrosse goalie in college, which meant that I had to get used to people throwing things at my head and not flinching. And it turns out that learning that skill is very helpful as an entrepreneur because
This is a challenge. Like
things are being thrown at me.
one of you needs to throw something at Sarah.
That's all right. But beyond that, I think one of the things that I've relied on in my career is ability to pick good teammates, and whether that's my co-founders or the folks on my team, investors, I think I have a pretty good eye for who makes a good teammate and how we can complement each other, and that I think is essential in the entrepreneurial journey.
I don't know if this is a superpower, but I think I'm really good glue. And so what I mean by that is that, so Jeff Busgang, he's a successful investor, They wrote a case about us at Harvard Business School, and he was teaching it, and I went and introduced myself. He's like, oh my God, I'm so glad to meet you. You're the glue. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, you're the one that holds everything together within the company. And I was like, you're right, that's exactly what I am. And if I could change my LinkedIn profile to say like glue, I would, but I think that would confuse a lot of people, so I haven't. But when you're building companies, I try and surround myself with people who are smarter than me, so people who are the best engineers or the best visionary or the best strategy. But you need someone to hold it all together and make it happen. And that's what I'm really good at. And I think part of it is being a middle child. I have an older sister and a younger sister who have really strong personalities, and so I was always kind of the diplomat a little bit in the family.
I wanted to turn it over to probably one question from the audience, but I just have to ask a follow-on to that, which is, being a female in a land of largely male founders and chief executives, is your superpower something that you had to convince people that you had over time, or was it always obvious to everyone that you work with that you were just this like badass unicorn lady?
I've had a really interesting sort of decade of growing up while founding and running a company. So I was 25 when we started Eventbrite, and I started it with my then fiance, now husband and co-parent. So it was just a very interesting trajectory for me. And I think through that, I've found along the way how to own my confidence, but it wasn't something that came naturally. And I don't feel like I had to convince anyone. I really just had to convince myself. That sounds so cheesy, but it's true. And it's something that happened over time. And I was just doing myself a disservice by not owning my badassery, if you will.
Nice.
So I was lucky that I started NextDoor with someone who I'd worked with for now 15 years. And so I suspect part of the reason that we were drawn to each other was that he kind of knew my badassery, if you will. And we knew that we complemented each other well. And I think that that's really valuable, right? That's a very important relationship. And having people around the table who you've worked with, who you've been through the battles with, allows you to have the confidence to know, I know how this person's going to react during the good times and bad times.
I started my company with a classmate. So we were students when we started CloudFlare. And when we told our other section mates that we were starting a company together, most people were like, huh? What? You guys even know each other? They were very surprised. We are very different people. I think of picking good co-founders as covering a lot of surface area, like a Venn diagram. You want a little bit of overlap because you need shared trust and shared vision, but you want to cover as much surface area as possible. You don't want a conversation of who's doing what. If you take Lee, Matthew, and I, the three of us that started CloudFlare, we were three totally different people, which on day one was really hard because it's hard to communicate, it's hard to do that. But if you make progress, then it became a huge strength. And there is something really powerful about having a diverse team. And diversity means gender, background, skill sets, all point of view. And we had a very diverse sounding team, which I think has served us well. And I played a role in that diversity.
The glue.
The glue.
All right, a question from the folks out there? Really? Okay. I'm going to go then one more question, which is, so you guys are all on top of, or you ladies are all on top of important technology trends. Is there an important trend that you think folks in the audience should be paying attention to that's going to have a big impact on our world or on the technology landscape or in your spaces in the next 5 years?
One thing that I see a lot is with the introduction of data and the access to data, I think that consumer-driven companies should be pushed very hard to provide personalization. And I think consumers are just expecting it. And I think sometimes tech companies can feel like it's an extra bonus to provide personalization, where I think we're quickly coming to a place where consumers, if not completely personalized, will bounce from your service.
I think the biggest thing is just the giving technology, giving access to everyone democratizes the voices that you're hearing from, and community evolves from that. And you have to be on top of, you have to be thoughtful about how to engage your community in an authentic way. Obviously at NextDoor, it's all about your neighborhood community, and we think about how do we help people in their local situation understand how to get the most out of NextDoor. And that's something I think applies to every single company out there. You have to engage your users and build community with them.
So the world is moving where everything is much more connected and on demand, and everything is connected, our homes, our bodies. And yesterday we heard so much more about like direct to consumer health, which I think is going to be huge. And so I think we're just the tip of the iceberg of what's happened by adding technology to all of these different things, industries we've been doing, financial services, healthcare. There's just so much innovation that's coming, and you spend time in the valley and you see it. But I think we're really going to see it come to fruition in the next 5 years. And it's going to change how we all interact every day in our daily lives.
Unicorn badass ladies, thank you so much.
You're the
You are
original.
awesome. Thank you.